be demonstrating how we might use a tool to help us demonstrate the count for students. So I'm using Braining Camp. I'm using their fractional bars on Braining Camp. So because this is both a counting and naming core concept, I thought I might also demonstrate how we name, right? So in this context, I might, at the start of a count, or if I was demonstrating using a visual tool like this, I might give students one label. So I might start off with our whole already marked, and I might ask students, and this is kind of the language that we're trying to model constantly, would be around when we're naming a fraction, we're asking how many fractional parts would fit into a whole space. So seeing that part of our number line is 0 and 1, our question would then be to students, how many of these yellow fractional amounts would fit into the space? So just as an assist to help them with the naming, right? So we might pull in some more, and hopefully some learners at this point are seeing that we're halfway there, right? And then demonstrating that once we have completed the whole, filled in the whole space between 0 and 1, we can see that each one of these, right? Each one of these fits in 4 times, right? Meaning that we're dealing with fractional fourths, right? Or we're counting in 1/4, right? So that's important, just as kind of like an exploratory piece to demonstrate how we might model the naming piece too, right? Um, and at that stage, now that we've identified the fourths, right, we can start the count. So, and I might even at that point keep the label on, just so that we always keep in mind what we're counting by, okay? So we already know, I'm going to remove that one just so that, it's a skill testing piece when we get later on as we count. So we're going to start. So we're starting off with our 1/4, right? 2/4, 3/4, 4/4. And so at this point, I would stop with my learners and say, okay, so we're at 4/4, right? We're at 4/4 in our count. What do we know about 4/4 that we've already identified? And a lot of our students would say, well, we know that we've already created one whole, right? So we can continue on our count from there, right? So there's 2 ways of doing this that I've done before. So one way would be to just keep counting, right, all the way to the end, and then go back and identify our benchmark holes, or as we're going, to keep identifying our benchmark holes. So I think we'll do the second one. So we are at 1, 2, 3, 4/4, 5/4, 6/4, 7/4, 8/4, right? And at this point, I'm hoping that our students, we would have a discussion. So how many do we have now? Another question would be, how do we know, right? How do we know if they're identifying this as 2 holes? How do we know that it's 2 holes? And hopefully they're identifying that, saying things like, we have 2 groups. Each group has 4/1/4 in them, and we know that 4/1/4 makes a whole, right? So 8/1/4, continue our count, 9/1/4, 10/1/4, 11/1/4, and 12/1/4. And hopefully at this point, we're asking students again, how many holes do we have? How do we know? Another interesting piece, so even if we did identify our thirds, our 3 as our whole, a more interesting piece would be to, stop midway in the count, right? So as opposed to going all the way to the 3, maybe stopping about here, right? And saying to students, okay, well, we've counted this far. How many do we have right now? So hope, some of them are going to say that we have 8, 9, 10, 11 1/4, which is, yes, accurate, right? And then some students hopefully are going to make that connection back and forth, saying that, well, we have 2 and 3 1/4, right? So not quite at the whole. So depending on your learning goal, depending on where you want to go with the conversation, you might you might continue to count and go back and label, and you might decide to pause at certain points and say, in between whole numbers, and ask, okay, well, how many do we have now, right? So it's really about your intentionality with your count, and yeah, and what kind of learning you're trying to bring out. Okay.